morning a little bit today. We're going to be closing out a series within the last few weeks, and I pray that it'll continue kind of in your heart and keep going in your life. But, I'm a big sports fan, a big football fan particularly. I like to watch more than I'm able to watch. I'm a Bears fan. So, that's Bears. What's going on with them right now? But, I'm not a fan particularly of the New York Giants, but I saw that I ran across this picture. A few years ago, they won the Super Bowl, and they won 4, I think, in their history, but they got the Super Bowl rings, and I want to show you a picture of it. I think it's pretty cool. Those 4 diamonds at the top represent the 4 championships they've won before. Those blue, they're big blue, and those are sapphires. I mean, that alone is a pretty cool picture. Those are enormous. You know, if you saw that on my finger, it'd kind of take up nearly the whole top of my hand, I bet. But the second picture I want to show you is one that I thought was what made the ring really neat. And inscribed in all of those rings that they got, he said these 2 words, all in. And that was put there by the staff there to remind everybody, every teammate, that the reason they won that championship is because everybody on that team went all in for everybody else. So, to some degree, that's what is required to have a winning hand when it comes to Christianity in this life. So we're going to conclude a series this morning called All In, and we're going to. We talked about it in weeks past, that when somebody playing poker that believes they got a winning hand, they take all their chips, which is why we have these chips, and these will be half price after the series is over today if you're interested in having these in your living room or anything. But somebody feels like they've got a good hand when it comes to poker, they take their hands and they push all their chips to the middle of the table. May I tell you this morning that is what God wants from you. That's what God desires and actually requires from us. It's all in. Someone said a while back, either he's Lord of all or he's not Lord at all. So he wants to be the Lord of your life. He wants to be in charge of your life. And the reality is that's the best thing that could possibly be the truth for you if he is. And so, there's one big difference this morning between going all in poker and going all in your life for Jesus. And that is when you go all in for Jesus, you don't just do it for Jesus, but you do it for those who don't know Jesus. Do you contemplate that thought very often? That sure, you follow Jesus because that's what he wants you to do, you to follow him. But are you motivated, a secondary motivation, is it there that you follow him because of other people? If you go all in for Jesus because there are many other people that are not in at all. And so, when you go all in for Jesus, you take self completely out of the equation. That's kind of what our theme verse for this series, Luke 9:23 says. Why don't you look at it on your outline this morning? Here's what it says. And Jesus said to all, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. Now, going all in means there's 3 things there in that verse. It means you deny yourself, it means you die to yourself, and it means that you devote yourself completely to Jesus. See, when Jesus died on the cross, he went all in. But he didn't go all in just for himself. He went all in for you, and he went all in for me, and he went all in for others. And he's an example for us in tons of areas, and in this particular case, in this area, we need to be the same. That we go all in for others. And so today we're going to look at the life of a man who did that. He literally went all in for those who are not in at all. And see, all in is not just an action, it's an attitude too that ought to permeate us. An attitude that says, I'll do whatever it takes to bring people to Jesus Christ. And so in this passage, today, you'll see that attitude right here. It's found in 1 Corinthians chapter 9. I want you to listen to it. I'm reading from a paraphrase. I'll get back to a different version in a minute, but this kind of clarifies what it means. It's in the message. Here's what it says. Even though this is Paul talking, even though I'm free of the demands and expectations of everyone, I have voluntarily become a servant to any and all in order to reach a wide range of people. Religious, non-religious, meticulous, moralist, loose living, immoralist, the defeated, the demoralized, whoever. I didn't take on their way of life. I kept my bearings in Christ, but I entered their world and I tried to experience things from their point of view. I've become just about every sort of servant there is in my attempts to lead those I meet into a God-saved life. I did all of this because of the message. I didn't want to just talk about it. I wanted to be in on it. So see, Paul was saying, for the sake of the gospel of Jesus, and for people who don't know God, I will do anything. I'll go anywhere. I'll pay any price. I will endure any cost. I will make any sacrifice to win anyone at any time that I can to Jesus. And when it comes to others, and especially others who don't know God, he's saying, I'm all in. There's 5 times in this passage of Scripture that he says, it talks about winning other people. When you say something that many times in a sentence, that usually means that's pretty important for the person. So he's talking about winning other people. He was determined to go all in for both the gospel and for Jesus. And here's what he's trying to teach us. I'm going to boil it down to one key takeaway for you today. Okay? Here's the key takeaway. You can fill in the blank. And that is, to be all in, you have to give all up. To be all in, you have to give all up. I saw this sign that was hanging in a riding stable one time. It actually had, here's what it said. They want people to ride their horses. And it says, we have fast horses for folks who like to ride fast. We have slow horses for folks who like to ride slow. We have big horses for big people. We have little horses for little people. For those who have never ridden horses before, we have horses that have never been ridden before. So I read that and I thought, man, they got that hanging in their lobby because they'll do anything and everything to get anybody to ride their horses. And I thought, I need a sign similar to that hanging in our church. With a similar idea that we will do anything it takes to reach people. We are going to do everything we can to reach as many people as we can with the gospel. And those people who do not know Jesus, those who do not know God, or those who do know God should be all in and doing all they can to reach people who are far from God. So to be all in, we must give all up. To be all in, we must give all up. Now there's some specific things this morning. I want to hone in on 3 things today that we need to, as a church, give up, or as individuals, give up in order for us this morning to reach those who do not know Jesus Christ. Okay? So let me give you those 3 things. Are you ready? Here's number 1. First of all, we must be willing to give up our preferences. We must be willing to give up our preferences. May I tell you this? This is one thing I love that I want to see our church really get. It's not about our preferences. It's not about my preferences. It's about who we're trying to reach. Right? It's not about our preferences. It's about who we're trying to reach. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, look what Paul said. He said, to the Jews, I became as a Jew in order to do what? To win Jews. To those under the law, I became as one under the law, though not being myself under the law, that I might what? Win those under the law. You could replace Jew, or you could replace under the law with a few other things. You could fill in the blank right there, but what he was trying to say is when he was with Jewish people, Paul behaved as a Jew in matters of moral indifference. Right? Matters of moral indifference. That's key, those key words right there. Things that were moral, Paul would not compromise his moral, but things that were of moral indifference, that were non-essential, Paul said, when I'm with the Jews, I'll behave as the Jews. And for example, he ate foods that Jewish people ate. He refrained from eating pork. He probably refrained from any kind of work on the Sabbath so that they might be more willing to give him an audience to hear the gospel. He did these things. These were not his preferences, but he passed on his preferences so that he could get an audience with these people to share the gospel. And as a believer in Jesus, Paul didn't believe that he must perfectly obey this ritual law to be right with God, but what he did was he adapted himself to the customs and the habits of the people. Why? So that he might win people to Jesus. So he passed on his preferences. He passed on his preferences. And so Paul said, I will do what I don't have to do, and I will even do what I don't want to do, if it will help others do what they need to do. Man, I want to get a sign and hang that in here. That's what I want every person to get that. To be motivated by that, that I will look, to say this in our hearts, that I will do what I don't have to do. I will even do what I don't want to do. It will help others do what they need to do. He was willing to lay aside his preferences in order to give him an open door to people who need Jesus. See, I want us to understand this morning that there's a difference today between compromising a conviction and minimizing a preference. Huge difference. Huge difference between compromising a conviction and minimizing a preference. Paul never gave up his convictions, but he did give up his preferences. And so there's nothing wrong with having preferences. I've got some. There's nothing wrong with having different preferences. That's cool too. But there is something wrong when you elevate a preference to a conviction. Sometimes we reveal that that's the truth with our conversation. We talk about preference as if, I'll die for it. Like, I'll leave. No, that's messed up. Not about our preferences. Right? Not about our preferences this morning. And so, let me give you some examples. Style is a preference. Style is a preference. Substance is a conviction. I won't die for style. But I lay my life down and I stand firm on substance, on the gospel. For style, I lay that down. That's a preference. Right? See, the style of music that we do in church, that's a preference. That's a preference. But the style of dress that you choose to come to church in, that's just a preference. But the fact that our music should honor Jesus and speak biblical truth, that's a conviction. That's a conviction. And that's one I stand firm on. I won't stand firm on a preference, but I want to stand firm on a conviction. There's a great example of this in Acts chapter 16, in verse 3, that Paul and Timothy would do whatever it took to reach people. And so it says that there was a young man named Timothy. His father was a Gentile, and therefore he was considered to be a Gentile. But Timothy loved God. He was all in for reaching people for Christ. And look what that verse says. It says that Paul wanted Timothy to accompany him, and he took him and circumcised him because of the Jews who were in those places. For they all knew that his father was a Greek. Something that Timothy did not have to do. But he did that. Why? Because he would gain an audience with the Jews that he may not gain otherwise. It was not a moral deal for them. It was not a moral decision necessarily for Paul or Timothy, either one. They didn't have to go that direction. They went that direction because it says in that verse, for the Jews, because of the Jews that were in those places. He did that because he had a greater audience with the people. So listen, when you go all in, reaching people for Jesus, you will build bridges and you'll burn barriers. You will build bridges and you'll burn barriers. You know what? Sometimes the church gets this mixed up. Sometimes the church will build barriers and they'll burn bridges. We want to be about taking barriers down. On matters of moral indifference, on matters that are not essential, take them jokers down. Right? We want to be about building bridges and burning barriers. And if we're going to be a church that reaches the next generation, we have to give up our preferences. If we're going to reach people who are far from God, people who are on the outside looking in, We're going to have to be willingly and even joyfully accepting of those who don't live the lifestyle that we wish they did, or who don't look exactly the way we wish they did, or who don't dress the way we wish they would dress. To be all in, you've got to give all up. What's more important this morning? Your preferences, or who we're trying to reach? That's a no-brainer. Sometimes we get mixed up on that. Right? So we've got to be willing. We want to reach people who are lost. We've got to be willing to give up our preferences. But number two, we must be willing to give up our privileges. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 21, he says, to those outside the law, I became as one outside the law. Not being outside the law of God, but under the law of Christ, that I might what? Win those outside the law. So what Paul was saying here was when he was with the Gentiles, he adapted himself to their manner of living as far as he could, as long as he could do so and still be loyal to Jesus. He did whatever he had to do. He adapted. He changed wherever he could. And he's not talking about moral things. He's talking about ritual law here. He was talking about cultural things. Paul was not going to bend on his convictions, but when it came to cultural things and non-essential things, he says, I will become as that. Paul wasn't saying if you want to reach drunkards, you've got to get drunk. He wasn't saying if you want to reach adulterers, you need to commit adultery. He was just simply putting down the privileges that he had so he could eliminate any hindrance, tear down any wall, break down any barrier, or move any excuse that anybody might have of why they would not listen to him share the gospel of Jesus. So he goes on to say, is why he says to the weak, in verse 22, to the weak I became weak, that I might win the weak. So who's the weak? The weak are those who are those immature believers who didn't understand that in Jesus they were free. They didn't understand that in Jesus he brought freedom. They still were believing that they had to observe these certain rituals in order to be right with God. And that wasn't the case. But Paul said, you know what? I'll go along with that to a point, and so I can begin to teach them the right way. I can begin to help them understand the right way to believe that there is freedom in Jesus. So but Paul said, I'll go along to a point. But here's the point. Paul is not talking about compromise. He's talking about compassion. See, compromise is to set aside truth. It's to change the truth. It is maybe to water down the gospel or to present a different gospel. And we're absolutely not going to do that. But to show compassion means that we are going to take anything away that would unnecessarily offend other people. Unnecessarily. Key word there. Unnecessarily. We're going to take away anything that would unnecessarily offend other people, would unnecessarily keep people from coming to Jesus, would unnecessarily cause people never to come back. Too often, we wait on people to come up to our level when the gospel calls us to come down to it. So if we're going to reach people who are far from God, we're going to have to give up our privileges. But then there's another thing. We need to give up. We need to be willing to give up our prerogatives. Don't be like Bobby Brown, okay? Don't make me sing that song. Nobody gets that. If I sing, I got to dance too. My kids have a heart attack. We got to give up our prerogatives. Look what he says in verse 19. For though, this is the key verse here, this whole part. For though I am free from all, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win more of them. See, normally a slave would do anything to win his freedom. Paul here, he says, I'm going to give up my freedom to become a slave. Though I have Jesus in my life, and I'm free from having to please anybody else, I'm free from everybody else's laws, I'm free from everybody else's expectations, I'm going to willingly become a slave to those who are far from God, that God might use me to bring them close to Him. And so it's understanding that when you to be all in, you have to give all up. And when you give all up, you go all in, that's when you win it all, and not just some people for Jesus, but the approval of Jesus. There's a story I ran across This week, it just floored me, it moved me, and I want to read it to you. During the 19th century, the Dutch ruled a region of South America that's called Suriname. A group of missionaries wanted to reach the people of a nearby island and tell them the good news about Jesus. The problem was, most of the islanders were slaves, and the plantation owners had forbidden the missionaries access to the island because they were afraid what would happen if the slaves became Christians. So these owners passed a law that said only slaves may talk to slaves. So most of us at this point would have gone, it's all over, done, going home. Party's over. Look at what happened. It looked like a barrier had been erected, and there was no bridge across. These missionaries got together and they prayed and they talked, and finally they came up with a way to burn the barrier and build a bridge. They sold themselves into slavery, becoming slaves themselves so they could talk to the slaves. They worked at their sides, facing the same brutal treatment, harsh tropical climate, hunger and disease. They became slaves to share the good news of Jesus with people who otherwise would have lived in spiritual bondage and died without Christ. The colony did become Christianized. Many of the slave owners came to Jesus, and an incredible revival broke out in that community. You know, at one point, 11 disciples who were all in started a movement. And that movement spread around the world, so that now we read that there are 2.6 billion people on the planet who profess to be followers of Jesus. You know why? Because of a man who said, whatever it takes, I'll do anything. I'll go anywhere, I'll pay any price, I'll count any cost that I might win anybody I can to Jesus. May I tell you this morning, to be all in means to give all up. That's what Jesus did when he gave his life for you and me. That's the least we can do as we give our lives to him. You willing to go all into it? But those are his terms. If we come to Jesus, we must come on his terms. Would you bow your head with me for a moment? As you listen to the message this morning, what would you say that God is now requiring of you? What would you say now that God is requiring of you as an individual? That you could be like this? All in for Jesus, but all in for others.
This service fell short.
Then I want to tell you that there's, the starting point is coming to Jesus for salvation. The greatest need